everyone. I hope that you are all having a wonderful start to a new week. I wanted to touch in and introduce our next learning module on creativity and also recap on a few things in terms of the invisible gifted. Now, first off, the learning module on the invisible gifted it's a challenging one because I get very emotionally upset. Um, Issues of underrepresentation in gifted they're just quite pervasive. And as we've seen throughout this semester, giftedness does not have this like one way to present itself. And oftentimes within our schools, we look for giftedness that works for our school culture. We look for the well behaved gifted, which are often high achievers. We look for individuals who are gifted in school smarts. We recognize students who can name states and capitals, but we don't recognize students who have a impressive memory in the sense of song lyrics or other facts that seem just like not school enough for us. So hopefully the activity that required you to take the role of a student who may be underrepresented, hopefully that kind of got you thinking. Actually, that activity, the See Me statement, is based on a creative learning strategy that is meant to produce empathy. It's called an encounter method, and we will look at encounter as well as other creative teaching strategies in our next learning module. So just a little hint there that a lot of the activities that you guys do in this class, several of them are focused on those creative teaching strategies. So hopefully placing yourself in someone else's shoes, assuming the role of a student who may not be recognized as gifted even though they are, can help you see that these characteristics are able to manifest in quite diverse ways. And that is one of the reasons I think the most important thing that we can do in terms of professional development is training on the characteristics of giftedness. So what can we look for that these students may be doing or not doing in the classroom? So thank you for your hard work on that. I look forward to reviewing all of the See Me statements that you wrote. That is typically my favorite assignment to grade. So I look forward to your hard work on that as well. Now, next topic, we are studying creativity for the next few weeks. This is a hard one for me because I basically studied creativity for 5 years while I was working on my doctorate. So condensing that into a 2-week segment is quite challenging. But if any of you are interested in investigating creativity more deeply, I'll give a shameless plug that I'm always looking for research partners. So I am conducting some undergraduate research right now with a few students who took this class last year, and there will be room for other studies as well if that's something that you're interested in. So, creativity. It's always interesting to me because teachers always say they want more creativity in their classroom, but they don't really know what they mean by that. So kind of like giftedness is really difficult to define, creativity is also quite difficult to define. More so, another issue we have is that with creativity, it's often seen as extra. So a lot of teachers will do like creative thinking challenges if they have time, or they'll do a creative project if they have time. So what happens is that students often equate creativity as extra, and therefore there's actually a lot of struggle in terms of transferring creative thinking skills across different content areas. So a little bit of background on your case study this week. So this case study is about a teacher who is excited to engage in some creative thinking strategies with her students. Basically, it's a great lesson. She brings in a pillowcase that's full of random objects. So like a spatula and a cup and a straw. And she asks groups of 3 to randomly draw out some objects from the pillowcase and create a magical device out of these objects to be an inspiration for a creative writing sample. Interestingly, the teacher is really excited about this, and the students freak out. Particularly gifted students sometimes freak out when we say, oh, we're doing this creative challenge, because they start saying things like, I'm not creative, or I'm not artsy. And really all of that is built on a misunderstanding of what creativity actually is. So your content in your library definitely goes over definitions of creativity. Just like giftedness, there's not one definition, but I would like to just quickly introduce you to one of the most well-known frameworks for defining creativity. And for that, we call on the 4 P's, the letter P of creativity. So first, we have the creative thinking process. Within the creative thinking process, there are different stage models of how we engage in creativity. The main thing that is important to process theories is that we're less focused on the end product and more focused on the fact that students are engaging in critical thinking and creative thinking. Most creative process models include a stage called incubation, which is basically the time that we are not actively working on the problem. If you think about, if any of you happen to solve like crossword puzzles or other kind of logic games, oftentimes we're looking at a question and it's like, oh, I know that. I can't think of that answer. And then you get frustrated, right? Put the puzzle aside, you go on a run, and then like halfway through your run, the answer just kind of pops up. That moment when you're not thinking about it and you're running, that is your moment of incubation. When the excuse me, I need some water. When the idea comes to you, that's your aha moment, and in creativity language, we call that illumination. So a lot of work on creativity process theories focuses on helping students engage in divergent thinking that goes off in a lot of different directions, but also helping students to converge and really elaborate on those ideas as well. So the first P is creative process. Then we have creative person or personality. These types of theories will focus on personality characteristics. So a couple of common characteristics of creative individuals would be flexibility, spontaneity, openness to experience. All of these things should be kind of sounding familiar. Curiosity, definitely connected to giftedness. So there's a definite intersection between creative personality and gifted personality. They're not the same, though. So the second P is personality, and these theories are basically looking at characteristics of famous individual people. So we have process, personality, press. Press is basically a fancy word for environment. So these studies will look at different environments that are conducive to creative thought. If you think about like Google is very well known for being helpful in terms of encouraging creativity. There's a lot of work on how to build physically and emotionally the classroom to be conducive to creative thought. And the last P is what we call product. In terms of product, typically we refer to the standard definition of creativity. In order for a object to be creative, according to this definition, it has to meet 2 requirements. The first being that it is original and new, and also the second being that it is useful. So for a product to be considered creative, it needs to be both new and useful. I get a lot of questions on that useful part. When we think about creativity, you can make something that's brand new, but it might not have any actual purpose. So that usefulness is about making it applicable to our world or to your own personal world. So there are some people who would think that newness can be personal as well. So a child who is creating his own language, that might not be super helpful to others, but it could definitely be useful in his personal, like, imaginary play. All right, so we have 4 P's: process, product, press, and person. Those are some overarching theories of creativity, and I wanted to give you those to kind of umbrella some of the content that you'll read this week. But let's touch back to the case study. So we have a teacher who is encouraging his students or her students to be creative. They're drawing random objects out of a bag, and they are challenged to put them together and create something new and do a creative writing assignment based off of this. So what is interesting is the students freak out. And I've seen this happen. Particularly students, the older they get, if they are in a gifted environment, they are often very high strung and they want everything to work out, and they don't do well with a lack of, one moment please, I'm recording my lecture, excuse me. So they don't do well in the sense of how they can actually engage in this creative thought. So imagine if I just knocked on your door and said, you have to be creative now. You probably want a little bit more direction. So the main challenge in this discussion board is for you to think about what kind of direction or what kind of scaffolding the teacher could give to their students to help them engage in this creative thought. So this happens all the time, guys. We tell students, be creative. I cannot tell you how often I see them, that word on rubrics. I'll see the work was creative, the presentation was creative, but we don't actually define it, nor do we give any kind of direction toward what creativity actually means. So the real challenge in this case study is first to be able to define creativity in a manner that would make sense to the students, but more importantly, to propose some methods that this teacher could use to encourage creative thought. So what are some things that the teacher can do to scaffold creative thinking? If you get stuck, I want you to imagine what you would want. So typically when my students are confused on something, they want strategies. They say, what advice do you have so I could do this project better? So in the sense of creativity, rather than saying, here's all of these objects, go and be creative, the first thing I would think of is some kind of warm-up. For example, I've done warm-ups where students pass an object around and they are asked to name different uses for that object, and then they could get in their small group and then start brainstorming. There are several different creative thinking strategies that are in the content for this module, and I want you to think about how you could use those strategies to scaffold the creative thinking process. So just to be clear, your assignment for this week is your discussion board post. So your initial post will be due Friday at evening, and do not forget about those responses to your classmates' posts by Sunday afternoon, or evening rather. The big thing I'm looking for here is that you propose a way to define creativity based on the literature, but that is understandable for the students, and more importantly, that you really think through what kind of scaffolding could be used in order to encourage creative thinking, and help the students feel like they have more direction in terms of this project. Again, thanks so much for your hard work, and if you have any questions, I would be happy to meet with you.